Next up in the auditorium, we have Patrick Crewdson, Editor-in-Chief of Media Organisation and partner of today's IMNZ Summit, Stuff. Patrick started his journalism career as the editor of the Otago University student newspaper Critic Te Arohi from 2002 to 2003. He then joined the Herald on Sunday at the time of its launch in 2004 and covered the 2005 election in the press gallery. From there, he joined the Dominion Post, where he worked as a reporter and web editor, and then took on the role of head of news. Now, in his role as Stuff Editor-in-Chief since 2014, Patrick has led the charge on quality journalism, multimedia innovation, and forward-thinking climate change coverage. In 2019, he was named Editorial Executive of the Year at the Voyager Media Awards and awarded the prestigious Wolfson Fellowship, although thanks to COVID-19, he hasn't actually been able to take it up yet. So thank you so much, Patrick, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be here with us today. We really appreciate being able to hear your thoughts. I'd just like to quickly say to everyone, remember, if you've got any questions, Patrick, put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll have a 10-minute Q&A session at the end. So again, on that note, I'll hand over to you, Patrick.
Tēnā koutou, thank you for having me. So you've heard a little bit of my career history there. I'm going to focus on the Stuff Limited parts of it. So I first entered the Dominion Post newsroom in 2004, 17 years ago, on an internship from journalism school. My journalism school tutor warned me against it. She said, it's a tough place, sink or swim. The Dominion Post newsroom's not for the delicate. When I got there, Stuff, the website, had launched 4 years earlier, but looking around that newsroom, there were no clues at all that the same company ran a website. The newspaper well and truly reigned supreme. Outside the editor's office, each day's front page was pasted up with circulation figures emblazoned above. And it was a big place, a big newsroom, heavy on hierarchy. There was an editor, deputy editor, at least one assistant editor, at least one associate editor, a news editor, chief reporter, section editors. The editor wore a suit and tie and sat in a large wood-panelled office with art on the walls and a private bathroom and wine racks. Each story that a reporter filed went through half a dozen pairs of hands, from the reporter to the chief reporter, news editor, copy sub, layout sub, check sub, and then eventually it appeared first in the next day's print edition. The greatest honour at the time was having your story as the front page lead. I probably don't need to tell you this, but the pace of change since then has been breathtaking. So that was 2004. Facebook launched the same year. The iPhone came 3 years later. And the media has experienced and is still experiencing extraordinary digital disruption. Over the last decade and a half, newspaper revenue and readership has gone like this. And digital audience numbers have shot up like this. And digital revenue has grown too, but not enough to offset those print losses. So as a consequence, even though our journalism now reaches more people than ever before, newsrooms have shrunk like this. So those of us who are now in leadership positions in the media have had to get very comfortable with leading through change. In every measurable way, our newsroom now is virtually unrecognisable from the place that I walked into in 2004. And I believe that our response to that profound change is emblematic of modern leadership trends that will be visible in many, many other organisations. So I'm going to talk to you today about three things that I consider to be pillars of modern leadership: culture, uncertainty, and collaboration. So as you heard up front, my job now is editor-in-chief of Stuff, which means I oversee the website, our digital, video, podcast, data, and interactive specialists, and our national investigative unit. Our newspapers remain very important to the company, but now the website is the flagship product, and the best evidence of that is in the name. In 2018, the company rebranded as Stuff Limited. We are a 24/7 operation, nationwide digital-first newsroom. We employ more than 380 journalists, which is more than any other New Zealand media outlet, and we publish hundreds of stories each day. Breaking news, education, health, politics, COVID-19, business, sport, climate change, entertainment, food, lifestyle, travel, motoring, probably anything else you can think of or name. And across our digital and our print products, we reach 2.3 million Kiwis per week, which is pretty significant reach, you know, in a country of 5 million people. The work we do has significant and often immediate consequences. As a manager, my direct reports are spread all around the country. We're not all in one newsroom. I've got people in Auckland and Tauranga and Wellington and Fielding and Christchurch, and the broader newsroom is spread out many more locations than that. I'm one of 3 senior editors within Stuff Limited, reporting to the editorial director, and our complicated internal structure means that many of the people that I depend on most each day don't report to me. So my job is as much about influence as it is about command or control. So that brings me to the first of the 3 leadership pillars that I wanted to talk about: culture. Newsrooms back in the day used to be proudly and defiantly unpolitically correct. So on the upside, that meant that we championed free speech and held no sacred cows, which is still the case. On the downside, you probably know what it means when people say that they're proudly un-PC. So newsrooms weren't for the faint of heart or the delicate. If you made a mistake in your story, or if you filed a weak intro, you risked a loud and public and often creatively profane dressing down. And these days, newsrooms are still colourful and robust places. Like with police officers or other people who deal with tragedy and trauma on a regular basis, there's a strong strand of black humour that runs through our operations. And culture-wise, you know, there's no mistaking a newsroom for art, but we're also a world away from the hierarchical, unforgiving, old-fashioned newspaper newsroom of 2004 that my tutor tried to warn me of. Our leaders now do their best to model being flexible and accessible and open to change. So for one thing, Mahogany Row is gone. I don't have a private office with art or a bathroom. I sit in the middle of an open plan newsroom, hot desking with everyone else. Our CEO and owner hot desks in the middle of the newsroom with everyone else. Personally, I'm very dedicated to my job. I work long hours. I'm pretty much glued to my phone. But my staff also know that I leave the office early to pick my kids up from school, and they know that the same flexibility applies to them. The current editor of the Dominion Post, Anna Fifield, makes toasties for her reporters in the shared kitchen every week. That's not something that would have happened a few decades ago. And you don't see many suits and ties anymore either. My boss, Stuff's editorial director, Mark Stevens, who oversees all of our digital and print operations, he often wears jeans to work. He runs an unofficial Stuff sneaker account on Instagram. Now, those things might sound really superficial, but I think when leaders are conscious about affecting culture, it comes from the accumulation of big statements, but also from those kind of mundane gestures about how you live your life at work every day. At the higher level, at the big statement level, we've tried to move from a culture of fear and hierarchy to a culture of ownership and empowerment. So I expect really high standards from my team, and they all know that. But these days we don't yell and swear at reporters when they make a mistake. By necessity and also by desire, as newsrooms have got smaller, we've become much flatter in structure. There are many fewer layers now between a journalist and publication on the website or in print, which means that the people who are creating the content have much greater ownership of and responsibility for every element of what they produce. As I mentioned, we publish hundreds of stories on the site every day, and the complex nature of the corporate structure means that the majority of them come from teams of journalists who don't report directly to me. I'm still ultimately accountable for whatever gets published on Stuff, but I can't attempt to vet or control it all. And no one person could sit across a huge 24/7 operation like that. I still get involved in the detail, and the staff who have to deal with my 6 a.m. feedback about fixing headlines and spelling and punctuation probably think that I'm too involved. But my efforts are probably better spent setting a culture of leadership to the rest of my team so that my senior staff share a set of values and standards and share ideas about what Stuff is, so that it's the same whether I'm there or not. I think accountability cuts both ways. So I expect reporters and our newsroom managers to be accountable for their work. And likewise, they expect accountability from me, which sometimes means visibly doing some of the tough jobs, not leaving all the dirty work for them. It also means being open to discussing and defending and sometimes reversing my decisions. And it means admitting when I'm wrong and being candid about my many shortcomings. Accountability also has to mean getting the credit when things go well. And historically, this has not been a strength of newsrooms. The work was supposed to be its own reward. There's a well-known management adage that you should praise in public and criticize in private, right? In newsrooms, we tended to criticize in public and praise not at all. As a counterpoint, I remember a former Don Post colleague once told me that the best thing he ever did when he was chief reporter in years of management leading the news team was that one day when a reporter came back after landing a particularly difficult interview, the chief reporter stood up at his desk and physically applauded, gave him a standing ovation, which the rest of the newsroom then joined in, which was a rare celebration of success. And this is something that personally I always have to remind myself to work at. But together, culturally, we're getting much better at celebrating success, offering positive feedback, and calling out wins. I think that all the changes we've made around culture were acutely visible during lockdown last year. All of a sudden, we were trying to run a national newsroom from our kitchens and lounges and spare bedrooms, often with, in my case, with bored kids in the background. And it was the biggest news story in a generation. At the same time, there were big question marks over the future of the media. And I'll come back to that, to Stuff's role on that in a moment. And we were being asked to take temporary voluntary salary cuts. Many of our staff were dealing with tricky personal situations as well, like spouses who were suddenly out of work. But amid all of that pressure, not only did staff continue turning up and performing, but they rose to the challenge and I think did the best work of their careers. We had built this culture before lockdown of being flexible about when and how people worked and about trusting them to get their job done and about staff taking responsibility for their own patch. And I think throughout a really stressful time, that meant that our staff remained engaged and contributing at a really high level. I like to think that's partly, at least, because they felt connected to their leaders and to the goals of the company and felt like they shared those goals and felt like they were recognized for their contributions to that success. Now, lockdown was an unpredictable and uncertain time, obviously, which brings me to the second leadership pillar that I wanted to talk about, which is modeling how to cope with uncertainty. I think this applies to most industries. Our working lives have become less stable, less predictable, in many cases less secure. And for Stuff, that underlying trend, which is something that the media industry absolutely faces across the board, it's been exacerbated for Stuff in particular by half a decade of high uncertainty over our ownership. So back about 5 years ago, in 2016, we were still owned by an Australian company, Fairfax Media, and we tried to merge with NZ, the owners of the New Zealand Herald. That was quite a big deal in media circles, and it was an for those of us working at Stuff, it was an unnerving prospect. Joining forces with our traditional rival company with a very different culture and style. What would it mean? How would it work? Whose jobs were safe? No one knew, and that uncertainty had a really big effect on the shop floor. So the Commerce Commission declined the merger that year, but that wasn't the end of the story. So the uncertainty lingered as we appealed to the High Court in 2017 and lost, and then appealed to the Court of Appeal in 2018 and lost again. So there was this extended period where this was going on in the background of everybody's lives. Then at the end of 2018, our owners, Fairfax, merged with Nine in Australia. Again, a big deal in media circles over there. Nine quickly decided afterwards they didn't want to own a New Zealand media arm, and they put Stuff up for sale. So then we were asking, who's going to buy us? What would that mean? Whose jobs are safe? And again, no one knew. And so piling that uncertainty on top of the merger drama took staff anxiety, through the roof. And then for a long time, there wasn't a buyer. Then lockdown happened and media advertising revenues went through the floor. We were having more visitors than ever before, absolutely insatiable demand for the news we provided. But as a business, the revenue wasn't there to support it. And you could say we're at crisis point. Some of you may already know, the story is a happy ending because our chief executive, Sinead Boucher, pulled off a surprise management buyout and paid $1 to take ownership of the company. But before the Boucher era began, we had the best part of half a decade of living with severe uncertainty. And if you let it, uncertainty can be paralyzing or debilitating. If you think about the fight, flight, or flee responses to a threat, when that threat is uncertainty, some good people will leave for jobs that offer them more safety or security, and others will react conservatively, just trying to freeze everything in place until there's some sort of outcome. And meanwhile, staff will look to the leadership for clarity, and that's clarity that we often don't have. So the trick, and this sounds simple to the point of reductiveness, but the trick we found is just to keep up momentum. One of the beauties of working in a newsroom is that every day is a new day. And so no matter what personal or professional trials you're going through, the news agenda keeps moving forward. You can't stop that. So I like to think that journalism breeds a certain type of resilience because you endure all the stress and challenge of getting the product out every day, dreaming up ideas, chasing people who don't want to talk to you, meeting tight deadlines and performing under pressure. And then you get up the next day and you start all over again. So as leaders within Stuff, my colleagues and I took those lessons of our craft and tried to apply them to the plight of our industry. And we used the resilience that we'd earned as journalists to help our teams just keep going. So that meant being candid with staff about what we knew and what we didn't, and helping them feel appreciated and see how their work remained valuable, and convincing them, letting them know that whatever happened down the line, the best way to cope with uncertainty was to pursue our own agenda and just keep doing what we're good at. None of those things are straightforward when you're leading a team of trained skeptics. Journalists have the credo, assume nothing, believe no one, check everything. But those skeptical people accepted the logic that when the broader circumstances are out of your control, you're best to focus on what you can control. So because we refused to flee or freeze, through that period of extreme uncertainty, we fought on, and we released what I consider to be incredible, award-winning journalism that I'm very, very proud of. And so I'm thinking of things like innovative interactive features like our New Zealand-made Ngā Nui Tarini project, which analysed the real impact of the treaty settlement process, chart-topping podcasts like Gone Fishing and Black Hands, future-focused climate change coverage through our Quick Save the Planet and Forever Project initiatives, and the gorgeous and agenda-setting documentaries of Stuff Circuit. All of those things came during what could have been a period of stasis for us, but instead became a period of great success. The third and final pillar of modern newsroom leadership that I want to talk about is collaboration, which has always been a tricky one for newsrooms to adopt. We've been right into competition against, internally and externally, and competition to be first and best will always be part of journalism. But these days we have to share and collaborate in ways that would have been unthinkable to a previous generation of very territorial editors. For every major project that Stuff does, we recruit staff from teams from all around the company. And we've got staff in Auckland and Hamilton, New Plymouth, Palmerston North, Wellington, Nelson, Blenheim, Christchurch, Timaru, and Invercargill. But we're not 10 newsrooms, we're one newsroom in many locations. We always say that the best story on Stuff on any given day can come from anyone, anywhere. As an editor, by personality, I'm naturally quite directive. But I have to rein those impulses in, and most of the time my approach has to be about trying to influence people and trying to get them to share a goal and want to work towards it. Persuasion and clear communication yield long-term better results than barking orders. Editors still have to be uncompromising about protecting the independence of our journalism, but being a modern editor means working smartly with the rest of our business as well. So only about half my week is spent actually working with journalists. The other half is collaborating with our product and legal and marketing and commercial teams. So as an example of modern collaborative leadership in action, I want to tell you about my most memorable day at work, which was March 15th, 2019, which you may recognise as the day of the Christchurch mosque terror attacks. So the first thing is that it was a situation of high uncertainty. Thanks to our amazing Christchurch newsroom led by Stuff's Canterbury editor and the editor of the press, Kamala Hayman, we had the very first journalists on the scene, so we had eyewitness reports. And very early on, we had copies of the killer's manifesto and his live stream video, so we had clues as to what was happening. But events were moving fast, authorities weren't in a position to quickly and confidently confirm vital details like how many people were killed or injured, whether there was more than one shooter, whether they were still at large. So as the story developed, our senior editors and I had to set the editorial standards, the rules everyone else would follow. And once upon a time, these would have been decisions made with the luxury of at least some time about what to put on the next day's page, front page, or on the 6 p.m. bulletin. But we were making those decisions in real time, because with a website, there's always a deadline, and it's now. So we had to decide whether to name the shooter or publish his photo, whether to quote from his manifesto, what to do with his live stream video. And with the benefit of 2 years of hindsight and a lot of public discussion about this, those things might seem like easy calls. But in the minutes and hours immediately after the massacre, when we had only partial information, when demand from our audience was at record levels, with a lot of unverified information being amplified on social media, and trying to balance the public's right to know with the most ethical way to cover the story, which, a story that was absolutely unprecedented in New Zealand's history, right then they were not easy decisions. And it's possible to freeze in a situation like that, to get overwhelmed by the uncertainty. But, not making a decision is making a decision of a sort when you're in a publication situation. So the leadership we tried to demonstrate that day was about being as decisive as we could without being rigid. And I know now that in the heat of the moment, not every call that I made was perfect. And as new information came in, I changed my mind and we changed what we published. But we were candid with our audience about what we knew and what we didn't. And we got through the uncertainty of an unprecedented news story because we kept moving. And we worked that day in a highly collaborative way. So very early on, the editorial director corralled the relevant editors from all around the country on a video call, and we agreed on an approach of Kamala Hayman in Christchurch and me in Wellington, working closely together to oversee the local and national news gathering efforts. We're in constant communication all afternoon and all night. We got our best staff from all around the country on a plane to Christchurch and told them, once you land, you're with Kamala. There was no territoriality or internal competition. And staff from every corner of the business moved as one that day. And like the work itself, the leadership was a shared effort. So I can't predict with any degree of confidence what the newsroom of the future will look like, but I'm sure change will remain constant, and the newsroom of 2038 will probably be as different from my Stuff newsroom of today as we are from the Don Post newsroom of 2004. But I will confidently predict that how consciously leaders set the culture, the ability to lead through uncertainty, and a taste for collaboration will continue to be vital. Now, I've probably run on too long there, but thank you very much for listening, and I'd love to hear questions.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. That was incredible to listen to. And my question would be, you're dealing with situations like you just explained about Christchurch and the shootings down there. How do you keep a track of leadership and the basics of leading your team and keeping a track of them when you're dealing with those sorts of situations, just off the cuff all the time?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, our Christchurch newsroom has built up a lot of expertise in coping with tragedy. So there's a lot of lessons they picked up through the earthquakes about how to lead a team in stressful, high-pressure situations, and how to look after your staff in those situations. People say that you can always, in an emergency, you can tell a journalist because most people are running away from the scene and the journalist is trying to get towards it. And there's this natural inclination when there's a big news event like the mosque attacks, everybody tries to come in and work at once. So there's a lot of care that we have to take with staff in terms of making sure that people don't overwork, bringing in, after the mosque attacks, bringing in counsellors to work with staff who had seen traumatic material. There's, the newsroom ethos of the past would have just been harden up. But these days, with a lot of credit to our Christchurch newsroom actually for what they've shown us about responding to adversity, we wrap more around our staff now.
Absolutely, you would have to. And just looking to questions over here, Sophie's asking, she'd like your advice on how you established credibility and a respectful rapport with teammates being a younger professional, and if you found that a barrier or a challenge.
I'm older than I look, I think. It's a flattering Zoom filter. That's yeah. I think one of the things I learned early on was, and I actually got it from reading Richie McCaw's autobiography, is that there's a tendency of a certain type of manager, me included, to think that you have to know everything and think that you have to have all the answers. And in my first years as a manager, when I was head of news at the Dominion Post and running that newsroom, that was absolutely what I did. And then I read Richie McCaw's autobiography as a study of leadership. And he talked in there about making that same mistake when he first became All Blacks captain, thinking that he needed to know everything. And his growth as a leader, as he realized that actually he could be perfectly comfortable admitting when he didn't know things, and it was better to recognize other people's expertise, show them respect, and help unlock their potential. So I like to think that I earned that respect partly from being confident in my own knowledge and abilities, but also by giving due respect to other people's talent and experience and helping them flourish.
Absolutely, that's a great answer. David the Awesome, as he's put his name here, is asking, he said he was interested to hear you say you managed people, but then talked about being a leader, and he's wondering, should we remove the term manager and replace it with leader?
Well, I think they are different but overlapping roles. The leaders within an organization don't have to come from management and might not have formal titles, and there are plenty of people who manage as administrators rather than as leaders. So I think they're not necessarily one and the same.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Absolutely. Another, let me see, question here about Great story of collaborative operating model. How did you go about introducing the change to that way of working?
Yeah, I guess I skated over that a little bit lightly. It was an extremely painful and a lengthy process. So newsrooms have always been very territorial. And over the last 10, 15 years, there have been many, many rounds of restructuring in most media businesses, and including in Stuff. So what we've done gradually, and then with some big changes at various times, is to change the entire structure of the company, change people's reporting lines, shift them away from roles where they worked for one particular publication and into a focus where they were working for a collective good. It's taken a really long time in our newsroom because people, have loyalty to print brands, for instance, that they've grown up with, and we don't want to tear that down, but we want to encourage people to be able to think more broadly than that. It's also partly about, I think, the voices that are in everybody's ear every single day. So when trying to bring that sort of to bring the culture change to accompany a structural change, you need to think about the incentives that people are faced with every day, what the colleagues and the managers around them expect them to do each day. Because if you put people in a structure and say, we want you to do A, but then all the voices around them each day are telling them to do B, no matter what the structure is, they'll do B.
Yeah, absolutely. And a question here from Nikki. She's asking, you've talked about with the Christchurch shootings and making sure you look after everyone else's in your team's mental health and stress levels. How about looking after your own? How do you manage that?
Well, I'm lucky to have staff who look after me as well. And, we made a point of doing that, for instance, throughout lockdown. With lockdown, it was very easy to be, many people would have experienced this, very easy to be working from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. There was plenty of news to go around, and my laptop was in the bedroom with me, it was in the kitchen with me, it was everywhere. So Stuff's deputy editor and I and our chief news director, we got into a system where we made sure to banish the other person, send them away, make sure they weren't working, clock in, clock out, be quite regimented about that with each other and make sure that we were giving each other the time off and the ability to unwind and de-stress. I exercise, I play with my kids, I try to learn how to meditate. That one's harder, but self-care things around that as well.
Absolutely, very important. And another question, just probably our last one, looking at the time, from Kirsty. She's saying, how with such a big team and such flexibility do you still ensure quality? Yeah, that's a good question. How do you cope with that? And also the fact that, any spelling or grammar mistakes or any errors are so public as well.
Well, if I'm entirely honest about it, I would say that some readers of Stuff say that we don't do enough to ensure quality, where they see spelling and grammatical and punctuation errors on the site. The advantage, at least, is, the saying is that on digital, it's never wrong for long. You can at least fix things. I think, now that we have such a flatter structure, fewer layers before publication, what we have to do is try to lay the groundwork to give people the appropriate training so that they are able to work to the right level of quality right from the outset, rather than needing or expecting someone later to be around to fix things for them. But that's not the sort of work that you can ever tick off and say it's done. It's always a constant process.
I've just got one last quick question, and that's just, newsrooms aren't usually so big on training, or are they these days in terms of leadership training? Has that changed at all?
Stuff has invested quite a bit in leadership training over the years through various internal and external programs. So it was in a external leadership program that Stuff put me into in 2013 or so that I was reading Richie McCaw's autobiography. I think Stuff actually does, I can't speak for other newsrooms, but I think we do actually put a reasonable amount of investment in our people in that way.
Yeah, it is important, isn't it? Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, look, I think that's unfortunately all we've got time for. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with us today. We have to wrap it up because we've got our next speaker about to come on stage, but it has been a pleasure listening to you and having you join us today. I'm really very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Excellent. Thank you.